What makes Prince George different from every other kid his age? He's second in line to the British throne. He's been photographed with a sitting American president while wearing pajamas. And he's already carried out duties inside Westminster Abbey that most royals wait decades to perform. Prince George of Wales isn't just William and Kate's oldest son, he's the boy expected to be king one day. And the last 13 years have already given us stories that most working royals never generate in a lifetime. This is where we start with the 8 facts about Prince George that show exactly why people can't stop watching him grow up. Prince George's spot in the royal family started with a number 3. He arrived at the Lindo wing of St. Mary's Hospital in Paddington, and from the moment his birth was announced by press release and followed by the display of a traditional easel in the forecourt of Buckingham Palace, the world knew exactly where he stood. He wasn't the heir. He wasn't even the next heir. He was third, behind his grandfather and his father, and that number defined his childhood for 9 years. Here's the thing about being third in line when you're a baby. It means you're famous, but you're not yet the story. Prince Charles was still heir apparent. Prince William was still second. George's slot mattered, but it was a footnote position, important, but comfortably distant from the throne. That distance is part of what makes what happened next such a big deal. George was born at St. Mary's Hospital, London, during the reign of his paternal great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, and was third in line before her death. That's the key detail. He spent almost his entire childhood as the great-grandson of a queen who had been on the throne longer than most of his relatives had been alive. Everyone assumed that arrangement, Elizabeth, then Charles, then William, then George, would hold for years, maybe decades. Then everything shifted in a single week. Following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, George's title changed to Prince George of Wales, and that title change was really just the visible surface of something much bigger. His position in line to the throne moved up one spot overnight. His grandfather became King Charles III. His father became the new Prince of Wales. And George, still just a schoolboy, became the second person on earth in the queue to wear the crown. The mechanics of that week were almost bureaucratic in how fast they moved. Upon the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, the Cambridge family went through 3 name changes over 2 days. On the day the Queen died, George reportedly went to school under one surname. By the afternoon, that had already changed. And the next day, his grandfather formally granted his father the title of Prince of Wales, which meant George's own position, title, and future had all just been rewritten in less than 48 hours. Before that week, George's path to the throne felt theoretical, something you'd explain to a curious kid with a chart and a someday. After it, the math got much simpler. Second in line means only one person stands between him and the crown, his own father. As the first child of the Prince and Princess of Wales, he is second in line to the throne, and news of his birth was celebrated the world over. A line that was written years before that jump actually happened, and one that suddenly felt a lot more immediate once it did. What's striking is how ordinary George's life looked on the outside during that transition. He didn't do interviews, he didn't give speeches. He went to school, played sports, and celebrated birthdays with family photos taken by his mother. But behind the scenes, aides and officials were recalibrating protocol around him. Royal historian Marlene Koenig has said that George is undoubtedly aware of his future role, and she's pointed out that his awareness likely sharpened specifically around the period when his great-grandmother died and the whole family moved up a rung. It wasn't abstract anymore. His grandfather was suddenly king. His father was suddenly the heir, and George himself had gone from a name on a future succession chart to the literal backup heir to the British throne. The jump also changed how the family traveled and how security treated him. Once he crossed a certain threshold in the succession, and once he hit a certain age, reports have said George and his father can no longer travel together, a precaution meant to protect the line of succession in case something happened to one plane or one car. That's not a rule most 13-year-olds have to think about. But most 13-year-olds aren't one signature and one funeral away from being told they're closer to a crown than they were the week before. So that's fact 1. Not just that George is in line for the throne, but that his exact position shifted in real time live in front of the entire world the week his great-grandmother passed away. It's the kind of jump that usually takes generations for George. It took about 2 days. If the succession jump shows what George's position means now, his birth shows just how much the world was already invested in him before anyone knew his name. The prince's birth was highly anticipated around the world and became a global news event, with reporters camped outside the hospital to cover his arrival. This wasn't a normal maternity ward story. Camera crews had been stationed outside the Lindo wing for days, waiting for any sign that Kate had gone into labor. Prince George was born at 4:24 p.m. on 22 July 2013 at St. Mary's Hospital in Paddington, London, and almost immediately the announcement machine kicked into gear. Buckingham Palace didn't just release a statement, it stuck to the centuries-old custom of putting an actual paper notice on an easel in the forecourt of the palace, letting crowds gather and read it for themselves before the news even spread online. Then came the gun salutes. Gun salutes were fired from the Tower of London and Hyde Park to mark the birth, a level of ceremonial fanfare usually reserved for monarchs, not newborns. But George wasn't just any newborn. He was at the time third in line, and his birth pushed the line of succession into a state that hadn't existed in generations. Here's the part that actually made headlines beyond the UK: the generational math. Prince George's birth marks the first time since the reign of Queen Victoria that 3 generations of direct heirs are alive at the same time. Think about that. Not since Victoria's era had a great-grandmother, grandfather, father, and son all been alive simultaneously in the direct line to the throne. That kind of historical rarity is exactly the sort of detail that turned a routine royal birth into international front-page news. The day after he was born, the world got its now iconic image: William and Kate emerging from the Lindo wing with their son. They paused on the steps of the Lindo wing to allow the world to catch a first glimpse of the newborn prince, before William buckled his son into a car seat himself and drove the family home. That image, a future king being strapped into an ordinary car seat by his father, became one of the most reproduced royal photographs of the decade. But even after the world had seen him, they still didn't know his name. For 2 full days, Britain and the world speculated. Bookmakers took bets. Newspapers ran polls. Finally, the Duke and Duchess announced that they would name their child George Alexander Louis on the 24th of July. 2 days after his birth, the delay itself became a story. Betting markets tracked which name would win, and George wasn't even the most popular guess going into the announcement. Then, 3 months later, came the christening, another moment engineered for maximum ceremonial weight. Prince George was christened 3 months after his birth in the Chapel Royal at St. James's Palace by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the guest list read like a who's who of royal godparents, including Hugh Grosvenor, the Duke of Westminster, and Julia Samuel, a close friend of the late Princess Diana. The christening reportedly marked another generational milestone. It was the first time in 119 years that 4 generations of the royal family were represented at a single christening, with George, William, Charles, and Elizabeth all present together. What all of this adds up to is a simple point. George's fame didn't build gradually. It was instant, total, and global from the day he was born, before he'd ever done anything, said anything, or even had a name. That's a strange kind of celebrity, one earned purely by timing and bloodline, and it set the tone for every fact that came after it. By the time George was old enough to travel, the pressure to see him hadn't faded, it had multiplied. Prince George accompanied his parents on their visit to New Zealand and Australia in April when he was 8 months old, and that trip turned into one of the most closely watched royal tours in years, precisely because a baby was on the itinerary. The tour had historical symmetry built right into it. The 3-week trip echoed the Prince and Princess of Wales's visit to Australia and New Zealand in 1983, when the couple took William, then aged 9 months, with them. So George was essentially retracing his father's own baby tour. 3 decades later, almost to the exact same age. Royal watchers noticed immediately, and the parallel only added to the media appetite. What's remarkable is how little George actually had to do to become the center of attention. Even though George only appeared twice, the BBC called the 9-month-old the star of the show. 2 public appearances, that's it. And yet, across 3 weeks of engagements, ribbon cuttings, and formal events involving his parents, it was the baby who dominated the coverage. Politicians noticed the effect too. The Australian Prime Minister at the time, Tony Abbott, spoke about George, suggesting the young prince might one day be welcomed as King of Australia, a comment that, whether meant as a light aside or a genuine nod to the monarchy's future in the country, made headlines on its own. Australian outlets ran with the moment, and reports at the time noted that public support for the monarchy seemed to grow after his visit. A baby who couldn't walk yet was apparently shifting public opinion on constitutional matters. The tour set a pattern that would repeat for years. George's mere presence at an event outweighed the actual substance of the event. It happened again a year later. In June 2015, George made his first appearance on the balcony of Buckingham Palace after the Trooping the Colour parade, and crowds below reacted as though a rock star had stepped out, rather than a not-yet 2-year-old in a sailor suit. Behind the cameras, George's early life had a much quieter rhythm than the headlines suggested. George spent his first months in Anglesey, Wales, before his family relocated to Kensington Palace in 2014. And then, from 2015 to 2017, the family moved again, this time to Anmer Hall in Norfolk, a rural home that gave the young prince a version of childhood that looked, for a few years, almost normal. He even started at West Acre Montessori School Nursery in January 2016, riding a school bus and mixing with local kids far away from palace corridors. But normal only stretched so far, because the world kept finding him. Whether he was on a stage in New Zealand, on a balcony in London, or, as it turned out, in his pajamas. This might be the single most shared image of George's childhood, and it happened because of a scheduling quirk more than anything else. Barack and Michelle Obama were in London for the Queen's 90th birthday, and they'd been invited to a private dinner at Kensington Palace hosted by William, Kate, and Harry. George wasn't supposed to be the story of the night. He became it anyway. George was allowed to stay up late to meet the Obamas, according to Jason Knauf, who was William and Kate's spokesperson at the time. The 2-year-old greeted the President of the United States not in a suit, not in formal royal attire, but dressed in his flannelette pajamas, slippers, and nightgown, complete with a white robe, monogrammed with his own name. He shook the President's hand like that. Photos of the encounter went out through Kensington Palace's own social channels, and within hours, they were everywhere. The bathrobe alone became a commercial event. A bathrobe identical to the one worn by the prince, made by my first years, sold out almost immediately after the pictures circulated. A nightgown selling out because a 2-year-old wore it to meet a president is about as good an illustration as you'll find of just how closely the world tracks George's every appearance, however small. There was a sweeter thread running underneath the pajamas story too. George wasn't meeting strangers. He was thanking people who'd already given him a gift years earlier. To celebrate his first birthday, Barack and Michelle Obama had gifted the family a handmade wooden rocking horse, and on the night of the dinner, George climbed onto that very rocking horse while his parents and the president looked on. Reports from the visit described the horse as embossed with the presidential seal on its saddle, a detail that made the whole scene feel less like a diplomatic photo op and more like an actual friendship between families. Even if one side happened to run a country, Obama himself leaned into the charm of it. Speaking to reporters days later, he joked that nothing was going to stop him from meeting George, calling the toddler adorable. Knauf, recounting the night years later on 60 Minutes Australia, described the moment right after the meeting when George walked outside and saw the presidential limousine known as the Beast parked in the courtyard, and just stared at it, transfixed, in a way that made the aides around him realize just how strange this whole life was going to be for a toddler who didn't yet understand any of it. The dinner itself carried real diplomatic weight beyond the pajamas. Obama and Michelle had spent the earlier part of that day at a lunch with Queen Elizabeth II at Windsor Castle to mark her 90th birthday, before heading to Kensington Palace that evening for the more informal, family-style dinner with the younger royals. George's cameo bridged both worlds, the formal state visit and the private family evening, in a way that made the whole day feel warmer and more personal than a typical diplomatic itinerary usually allows. What makes this fact stick, more than a decade later, isn't really the politics of it. It's the mismatch. The most powerful man on earth, shaking hands with a toddler in a robe who was more interested in his rocking horse than in world affairs. That contrast is exactly why the photos never stopped circulating, and why, whenever people list memorable royal moments involving George, this one almost always makes the cut. 9 years after the pajamas, George stood inside Westminster Abbey with an actual assigned duty. No longer just a photogenic child at a family event, but a working participant in one of the most significant ceremonies in British history. Buckingham Palace announced on 4th April that Prince George would play a special role at King Charles III's coronation, confirming what royal watchers had speculated about for weeks. George, who was second in line to the throne and the eldest son of the Prince and Princess of Wales, would join 3 other pages for the king, a role with real logistical responsibility attached to it, not just ceremonial standing. The job itself was specific and physical. The 9-year-old prince was selected to be among 4 pages of honor to His Majesty the King, a role that comes with a traditional uniform and the task of holding the train of the king's robe whenever he has to walk. That's not a background role. If George stumbled, hesitated, or lost his grip, it would have been visible to the millions watching around the world. He didn't. He never stepped out of line or forgot what he was supposed to do, holding his position through the entire procession into the abbey, dressed in black trousers and a red tunic with gold embroidery at the buttons. Even at the very end of the day, when the king and queen made a surprise second appearance on the Buckingham Palace balcony, George stayed close behind his grandfather, still performing the role assigned to him. The palace made sure to frame this as a family moment as much as a state one. A spokesperson for William and Kate said the couple were very excited and delighted that George had been chosen as a page, language that suggests this wasn't just protocol being followed, but something the family genuinely wanted for him. George wasn't alone up there. The 8 total pages of honor included George along with Camilla's 3 grandsons and a great-nephew. But among that group, reporting at the time consistently singled him out as the most prominent of the pages, given his place in the line of succession. He wasn't just a family friend filling a ceremonial slot. He was the future king's son, doing a job at the ceremony that made his grandfather king. The coronation gave George something he'd never had before, a title people started using specifically because of what he'd done that day. Royal historian Marlene Koenig later pointed out that his role made him the first member of the royal family to have such a role in the service, a distinction that separated his coronation appearance from every young royal who came before him. She also suggested that the day gave George something deeply personal to carry forward, a preview, in her words, of the knowledge that he too would one day be crowned in a coronation ceremony of his own. That's the shift this fact represents. Up to this point, George had been famous for existing, for being born, for being carried, for wearing pajamas at the right moment. The coronation was the first time he was given a job with actual consequences, in a ceremony watched by the entire world, and he executed it without a single visible mistake. Most 13-year-olds don't think about plane manifests. George does, or at least the people around him do it for him, because of a protocol most people don't even know exists until it applies to their own family. Royal protocol kicked in after George turned 12, meaning that he and William can no longer travel together. It sounds almost bureaucratic when you first hear it, but the reasoning is deadly serious. Royal experts have confirmed over the years that when it comes to air travel, William and George will be separated. And the logic behind it is simple. If the heir apparent and the second person in line were both on the same aircraft, and something happened to that aircraft, the line of succession could be thrown into chaos in a single moment. This isn't a rule invented for George specifically. It's baked into how the monarchy has operated for generations, quietly limiting how the top tiers of the family move around the world. But it's rarely discussed publicly until a family member ages into it, And George, crossing that threshold at 12, turned an obscure contingency plan into a headline. What's notable is how differently this rule treats George compared to his siblings. Charlotte and Louis don't carry the same restriction, at least not yet, because they sit further down the line of succession. Losing one of them in a hypothetical accident wouldn't create the same immediate vacuum at the top of the monarchy. George's position, specifically second in line, is what triggers the precaution. It's a rule that exists because of exactly the math we talked about back in the first part of this video, the jump from third to second. That happened the week his great-grandmother died. The rule also quietly reshapes how the family plans everyday life. Family holidays, school pickups, even simple trips abroad now require a level of choreography that most families never have to think about. Working out which parent flies with which child and on which plane long before anyone books a ticket. It's one of the clearest signs that George's daily existence, however ordinary it might look in family photographs, runs on a different set of rules the moment his position in the succession is factored in. Royal historian Marlene Koenig has framed George's overall awareness of his future in similar terms, describing how his sense of what's coming has sharpened gradually, shaped less by any single announcement and more by the accumulation of moments like this one. She's noted that George may be a 12-year-old schoolboy who loves sports, but he is most certainly aware of his future and a travel restriction that separates him from his own father whenever they fly is exactly the kind of quiet, constant reminder that keeps that awareness sharp, even when nobody's talking about it directly. Every fact so far has been about what George has already done. This one is about what's coming. A title so tied to his family's identity that its next transfer will say a lot about how the monarchy plans to hand power down. Prince George is quite literally born to be king. And with that predestined status comes a fleet of accompanying royal titles that he'll accumulate before he even ascends the throne. Chief among them, Prince of Wales, the title his own father now holds, and one with centuries of history attached to it. King Charles bestowed the title on William mere hours after he ascended the throne, a swift handover that set a precedent. People are already watching for when William eventually becomes king himself. Royal expert Hugh Thomas has said there's a high chance Prince George might gain the lofty Prince of Wales title once his father takes the throne, following the same pattern that's played out across recent generations. But Thomas also pointed to something that comes bundled with the title. Whoever George eventually marries would become the future Princess of Wales, taking the title from George's own mother, Kate, the same way Kate herself received it from Camilla. That said, there's no guarantee George gets the title immediately or even quickly. History gives two very different precedents for how this can play out. When Queen Elizabeth ascended the throne in 1952, King Charles III automatically became Duke of Cornwall with all the titles associated with being heir to the throne, but Charles didn't actually become Prince of Wales until 1958, when he was 10 years old. A 6-year gap between becoming heir and receiving the title that usually comes with it. William could choose to follow that same slower route with George, waiting until his son is older before formally granting the title, rather than handing it over immediately the way Charles did for William. There's a practical side to all of this too, separate from the ceremony of it. With the title comes the Duchy of Cornwall, a landed estate that funds the household of the heir to the throne. Whoever holds the Prince of Wales title effectively inherits both a name and a source of income that supported the role for centuries, meaning George's eventual title isn't just symbolic, it's an entire operating structure that will one day be handed to him along with everything else. For now, George remains simply Prince George of Wales, a title tied to his father's current position rather than his own eventual one. But every royal historian who's spoken on this has agreed on one point: whatever happens with the Prince of Wales title down the line, George's position as second in line means that title, or something functionally like it, is coming his way eventually. It's just a matter of when his father decides the moment is right. After succession jumps, presidential meetings, and coronation duties, it's easy to forget that George still spends most of his time doing things that have nothing to do with any of that. This last fact is about the parts of his life that look almost deliberately normal, and how those ordinary details have become just as newsworthy as everything else on this list. Take his birthday portraits. Every July, Kensington Palace releases a new photo to mark another year, and those portraits are often taken by his mother, Catherine, who's known for having a passion for photography. It's become an annual tradition in itself. Royal watchers now anticipate the photo release the way they'd anticipate any other family milestone, and each new portrait gets picked apart for what it reveals about how much George has grown, both literally and in terms of his bearing. Then there's the baking. It's a small detail, but one that's been repeated by his own mother in interviews. Kate has said she loves to bake with her children, and her eldest son helps her in the kitchen, paired with the detail that George has a sweet tooth. It paints a picture of a kid who, away from cameras and ceremonial robes, is just a kid who likes cake and helping his mom make it. School has followed its own quiet arc too. He started, as we mentioned earlier, at a Montessori nursery in Norfolk, before the family's return to London saw him begin attending Thomas's Battersea School in the autumn of 2017. That move alone reshaped the family's schedule. Kensington Palace became the base again, and George's daily life took on the rhythm of a fairly typical London schoolboy, uniform and all, even as protection officers waited outside the gates every morning. Sport has become one of the more consistent threads running through recent coverage of him. Koenig, describing George's temperament heading into his teenage years, put it simply, that he's a schoolboy who loves sports. And public appearances over the past few years back that up, with George regularly turning up at football matches and rugby fixtures alongside William, who's made no secret of trying to pass his own football fandom down to his son. And then there's the balance the family has tried to strike between all of this ordinary life and the demands of the role George is growing into. Coverage of his recent birthdays has repeatedly returned to the same theme, that his childhood has been shaped by royal tradition, family values, and preparing for a unique future, a description that captures the tension at the center of everything on this list. He bakes, he plays sports, he goes to school. And at the same time, every one of those ordinary moments is happening to a boy who's already carried a king's robe, already met a president, and already jumped a spot in a line of succession. That hasn't looked like this since Queen Victoria was alive. That's the thing about George that makes him different from most kids his age. And honestly, from most royals in history too. His life reads like two timelines running in parallel, one full of birthday cakes and football pitches, the other full of coronations and constitutional weight, and nobody quite knows yet how those two timelines are going to look once he's grown all the way into the role that's been waiting for him since the day that easel went up outside Buckingham Palace.